A pastor wielding pangas in a primary school, bodyguard beatdowns, burning down churches, and bedroom activities. This story has a lot of alliteration, but it is also one of the most insane stories you will ever hear. So strap in, because in the last 2 to 3 days, Pastor Mboro, and yes, I know what that means in Shonga and Swahili, has had the most insane time and now been arrested. And this is a really big story because it's got some huge issues in it. The rule of law, how red flag behavior is dealt with or not dealt with in South Africa, and the way that people exploit positions of power, and particularly claims of being religious, of being pastors and prophets. They use that to take unbelievably terrifying power over people. That's what this story is about. Welcome to The Issue with Dan Corder. South Africa is truly a movie, and this is truly the watch party, and this is The Issue with Pastor Mboro. All right, just quickly, if you still don't know, we have a twice a week TV show, The Dan Corder Show on ENCA, and you can watch full episodes on enca.com. And in just the last month, we have started a weekday morning podcast. It's a news podcast. You can listen to it every weekday morning to find out the big news about the news worth knowing and what's going on. All right. I'm sure you've seen the viral video going around on Twitter of what happened at Matsediso Primary School earlier this week. Pastor Mboro forced his way into this primary school, which is like 5-year-olds to 13-year-old children, had an altercation with the staff, was wielding a panga, had a bodyguard, some accomplice with him who was holding an enormous assault rifle, and they grabbed 2 kids, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, who are Pastor Mboro's grandchildren, and then they put them in a car and drove them away. The kids were kicking and screaming, they were crying, they really didn't want to go. And since then, Pastor Mboro and a few others have been arrested, and his church has been burnt down. But before we get into the fullness of that story, you need to know a lot about who Pastor Mboro is and his track record, because I think a lot of the media and coverage of this has just not explained who this man is and what he is capable of doing and what he often does. So let's start with his church, Incredible Happenings Church. He has made very significant national headlines for a long time because some crazy things, according to him, are happening at that church. For example, one of the crazy ones, in 2017, Pastor Mboro claimed that a married couple had come to them and complained of, let's just say, having trouble in the bedroom. Let's just say that the man, the male member of that relationship, his male member was a pretty dysfunctional member. And so that they hadn't had membership together, the two of them, for the last year, and it ruined their time in the bedroom. The wife was no longer attracted to the man. They were considering separating, and they asked the pastor on a Saturday to please help them. And so Pastor Mboro claims that he prayed for them on the Saturday, and on the Sunday, straight away, the man and woman came to him and said, "Thank you so much for your prayers. You've saved our marriage." The woman was energetic in bed. The male member was membering, and they membered with membership, and everything was fixed. And the woman said, "Pastor Mboro, if it wasn't for your prayers, I would have divorced from my husband." So Pastor Mboro called this his bedroom Sunday service and said he was offering this now to other couples. He claimed at his Incredible Happenings Church that his prayers had delivered membership happiness back to this couple in record time. Guys, that was Saturday to Sunday. That's Checkers 60/60 delivery speed. This is the kind of guy we're dealing with, an extremely charismatic leader who claims to pull off extraordinary miracles on the regular. And if you're in his congregation, you believe him. He claimed that his prayers to God had postponed day 0 and went to Cape Town to try and meet big political leaders to tell them that he was the reason why day 0 was postponed. Guy who tries to get national headlines and prestige and reputation and fame through miraculous works that you can decide for yourself whether you believe him. But it's also much more serious because for a long time, Pastor Mboro the red flag behavior has been potentially criminal. So 10, 11 years ago, Sonke Gender Justice, which is a gender rights and protections for particularly women and children NGO, as well as the South African Human Rights Commission, laid complaints against Pastor Mboro, and he was actually arrested on allegation of SA against members of his own congregation as part of his spiritual work, as part of his acting on behalf of God and doing God's will. And in the end, all of that went away because the people who experienced this said, no, we didn't consider it violence against us. We didn't consider it SA because it was the word of God, is the will of God, it was the act of God, and it healed us and helped us, and we are thankful. So people are allowed to decide whether or not they are victims. It is unclear whether they were coerced or pushed or brainwashed into saying that stuff, or whether they truly, deeply believe it. And I'm not here to pass judgment on them, but that's why that stuff went away. But that's the kind of thing that Pastor Mboro does. He also has bodyguards, and there have been multiple reports of the bodyguards intimidating people, beating people up, but apparently it's fine because it's the will of God. And that's why he's really scary, because there are many people who exploit their positions of power, their power over others, to abuse people and have their way with people in a way that the vast majority of people think would be unacceptable, right? Potentially law-breaking and immoral. In particular, we see this happen quite often in religion, all religions. And that is simply because in certain kinds of religion, in certain positions in religion, like the way Pastor Mboro inserted himself as the voice of God, the messenger of God, the will of God, and the enactor of God's will over his congregation, that gives him almost supreme power over his congregation, because the congregation believes in God. The congregation believes Pastor Mboro is representing God and is acting on God's behalf. And so anything that Pastor Mboro wants to do is the will of God, and therefore fine and good, and maybe even a miracle or a blessing. And maybe you're sitting here watching thinking, Dan, you're bashing religion. I'm not bashing religion. Religion does an incredible amount of good, and the vast majority of religious leaders don't do this kind of thing. But you have to recognize that when it is a relationship between you and your concept of God or the gods, who are ultimately giving you total purpose, total identity, total affirmation of your life decisions, and total reason to exist, there are humans on earth who have an enormous amount of control over that relationship you have with your God, and it gives them almost supreme power over you to do what they want. And that's what Pastor Mboro has done. So now you truly know about this man. Let's look at what he did earlier this week. So he stormed into a primary school, Matsediso Primary, with 2 Pangas and a huge assault rifle with another person, and demanded to get his grandchildren. And the staff said, no, you can't do that. How could you have this altercation with us, bring these weapons onto a primary school? It's an awful, awful situation and should be condemned. I don't think there's any justification ever for 2 Pangas and an assault rifle in a school. Now, here's the backstory. The Pastor Mboro's son married a woman, and they had 2 kids. These are the 2 kids in this school. And the mother passed away earlier this year. And since then, there has been a dispute between the 2 families over who should get custody over the kids. And it seems to be that reportedly, meaningfully, the kids' caregiver, the kids' meaningful life guardian has been their grandmother on the mother's side. So the mother's mother. And so their family believes that the grandmother should look after the kids. But Pastor Mboro's son is their father and insists that he should get custody of the kids, and Pastor Mboro falls on his son's side of the argument. They had a big contentious meeting this weekend, and then the grandmother reportedly called the school and said, don't hand over these kids to their father and grandfather. And then Pastor Mboro claims, hasn't yet been confirmed, that his son, the father of the kids, went to the school and demanded to have his kids. And Pastor Mboro claims that the staff apprehended him, detained him, and beat him up. We don't have evidence of that yet, or proof, but that's what he claims. And therefore he says, you go in there and you grab your weapons because you need to do anything you possibly can to try and get your son back and get him safe and your grandkids. And they stormed into the school, took the children, kicking, screaming, and crying, forced them into a car, and drove away with them. Terrible. Unacceptable, condemnable behavior. Pastor Mboro and a raft of others have now been arrested. They've been detained. They're going to face their day in court. And a lot of members of Katlehong, the community, who have hated or distrusted or rejected Pastor Mboro for many years, are livid and furious with his behavior. And just yesterday afternoon, a group of community members went to Incredible Happenings Church and burnt it down. Totally burnt, It's on the ground. It's flawed. Apparently, some school pupils also went for the burning down of the church. I don't think they were the same school pupils from Matsediso Primary. They're like 5 to 13-year-old. But I think the core of this story is to think about how people, often in religion, but in various positions of power, how people get away with red flag behavior, potentially criminal red flag behavior, for years and years and years because of their positions of power over others. This is a story about how the law has been unable to really monitor or handle this guy. He's also in trouble, by the way, for not handing over his financial records and doing dodgy dealings with money. Like, he just won't hand over to investigators. So there've been a lot of moments when it's very clear to any reasonable person he deserved more scrutiny, but he constantly got away with it. We need to think about how the law sometimes really fails to handle clearly dangerous, potentially damaging people. But we also, as I said earlier, need to think about how particularly religion has the dangerous potential to give individual humans extraordinary, dangerous levels of power over others. So now you know about Pastor Mboro.